He thought losing his job was the worst thing that could happen, until a mysterious email landed in his inbox, offering something he never saw coming. The restaurant exuded quiet sophistication, where dim lighting met crisp, white tablecloths, and waiters glided like shadows between tables. Each evening, well-dressed patrons murmured over extravagant dishes, their laughter blending seamlessly with the soft clinking of glasses. For 19-year-old Jason, it was just another shift, another way to stay afloat while balancing college and rent. He wasn't one of those kids with a safety net, no trust fund, no emergency savings, just a paycheck he depended on to survive. He navigated the tables with precision, an empty tray balanced effortlessly in one hand, his eyes scanning the room. His boss, a man who never smiled, always insisted that the best waiters were invisible, fast, efficient, yet completely unnoticed. And that was fine by Jason. He wasn't looking for attention. But then, it happened at a corner table. A woman was adjusting her clutch when something slipped from her grasp. A small, sleek object. Maybe her phone. It tumbled to the floor, sliding just beneath the edge of the table. She hesitated, eyes flickering around, as if debating whether to crouch down and grab it herself. Jason was nearby, clearing a table just a few feet away. Instinct took over before he could even think. He bent down, retrieved the object, and held it out to her. Their eyes met for a brief second. That's when it hit him. Melania Trump. She accepted the item with a quiet, almost whispered, "Thank you," her expression unreadable. Jason gave a polite nod, then turned away immediately, already moving on to the next table. No big deal, just a simple reflex, something he didn't even think twice about. But someone else did. From across the restaurant, the manager had been watching. His face remained unreadable, but his stance shifted. He glanced toward the kitchen, then back at Jason, before silently slipping into his office. Jason had no idea that within 24 hours, his life would take a turn he never saw coming. But that night, he had no reason to suspect a thing. The next afternoon, Jason walked into work expecting nothing more than another long, exhausting shift. He clocked in, tied his apron, and made his way toward the back for the usual pre-shift meeting. But before he could get there, "Jason, my office, now." The words were cold, clipped. Not a request, an order. Jason blinked, caught off guard. He had never been late, never missed a shift, never even received a complaint. His mind scrambled for a reason as he followed Mr. Calloway down the narrow hallway to the small office in the back. The moment the door shut, he knew something was off. Calloway didn't sit. He didn't offer Jason a seat either. He just folded his arms and exhaled sharply. "You violated protocol last night." Jason frowned. "What?" Calloway's jaw tightened. "You interacted with a high-profile guest. Without permission." Jason's stomach twisted. "Are you serious?" "I just picked something up for her. It took 2 seconds." Calloway shook his head. "That's not the point. We have strict policies for a reason. Your job is to serve, not insert yourself into the guest's experience." Jason let out a sharp breath, frustration flaring. "I wasn't inserting myself into anything. I was just being polite." Calloway didn't flinch. "Doesn't matter." She didn't complain, but another staff member saw it and reported it. "This restaurant serves elite clientele. The last thing we need is an employee overstepping. We can't take that risk." Jason couldn't believe what he was hearing. Fired over this. He had worked himself to exhaustion, pulled double shifts, covered for co-workers when they bailed, put up with rude customers and impossible expectations, only to be tossed out over a moment so insignificant it didn't even register as a mistake. "You're kidding," he muttered. Calloway's face remained stone cold. "Turn in your apron. Your last check will be mailed." That was it. No second chances. No warnings. Jason stood there, his pulse hammering in his ears. He wanted to argue, to make him see how absurd this was. But one look at Calloway told him everything he needed to know. There was no point. So he swallowed every bitter word rising in his throat, ripped off his apron, and tossed it onto the chair. Fine. He didn't wait for a response. Spinning on his heel, he yanked open the door and strode straight out of the restaurant. The late afternoon sun hit his face like a slap as he stepped onto the sidewalk. But the world, it didn't care that he had just lost his job. People kept walking, cars kept moving, life carried on, as if nothing had happened. Jason pulled his phone from his pocket, staring at the screen, debating his next move. But for the first time in a long time, he had no idea what to do next. Sitting on the subway, Jason stared at the floor, his thoughts a tangled mess. The rhythmic clatter of the train barely registered as he replayed the last 20 minutes over and over in his mind. Fired. Just like that. No warning. No second chance. The worst part. He hadn't even done anything wrong. His fingers tightened around his phone. He could call his mom, she'd listen, tell him everything happens for a reason. But right now, he wasn't in the mood for forced optimism. His dad would be a different story. You should have just kept your head down. Follow the rules. Jason could already hear the words, and he wasn't ready for that conversation. The train jerked to a stop, but he barely noticed until the automated voice called out his station. He stood, moving through the doors, stepping onto the crowded platform. The air smelled like metal and old newspapers. People rushed past, eager to get home, while he just stood there, stuck in his own head. Rent was due in 2 weeks. His books for next semester weren't cheap. A grocery list sat in his notes app, filled with things he now couldn't afford. His jaw tightened as he walked up the stairs to street level. His apartment was only a few blocks away, a tiny studio with a dripping sink and a window that rattled when the wind blew. It wasn't much, but it was his. And now, he had no idea how he was going to keep it. The weight of it all pressed down on him. Pulling out his phone, he scrolled through job listings, searching for anything. Host, bartender, delivery driver. Nothing promising. None of them paid as well as the restaurant. By the time he reached his apartment, frustration had curdled into exhaustion. He tossed his keys onto the counter, kicked off his shoes, and collapsed onto the couch. The silence felt heavy. Maybe Calloway was right. Maybe he should have just walked past the table, ignored the whole thing. But that wasn't who he was. He stared at the ceiling, debating his next move. Maybe tomorrow he'd print out his resume, hit a few places in person. He'd figure it out. Somehow. His phone buzzed. He barely glanced at it, assuming it was a junk email or some notification he didn't care about. But then, something about the subject line made him pause. Your kindness did not go unnoticed. A strange chill ran through him. He sat up, his pulse picking up speed. The sender? Unfamiliar. No name. No information that gave him a clue. Just those 6 words. His thumb hovered over the screen. Something told him. This was about to change everything. Jason stared at the email, his heartbeat quickening. Your kindness did not go unnoticed. That was it. No sender name. No extra context. Just a subject line that felt both cryptic and deliberate. Jason's fingers hovered over the screen. A scam? A prank? His email wasn't exactly private, but something about this felt different. After a few seconds of hesitation, he tapped it open. The message was short. You did something yesterday that most people wouldn't. You helped without expecting anything in return. People like you are rare. If you're open to an opportunity, reply to this email. Jason read it once, then again, and again. His first instinct? Skepticism. Nobody just sends random job offers out of nowhere. But then, this wasn't exactly a job offer, was it? No company name. No position mentioned. Just a vague reference to what had happened at the restaurant. Someone knew. But who? He leaned back against the couch, his mind racing. Could it be Melania Trump herself? No, that made no sense. People like her didn't send emails. They had assistants, teams, layers of security. Maybe someone else at the restaurant had seen what happened, felt bad about how things played out, or his stomach twisted. What if this was some kind of setup? Clicking on the sender's email, he studied it closely. Nothing familiar. Just a random string of letters and numbers. No real name, nothing recognizable. A red flag. But the way the message was written, it didn't feel like a scam. No sketchy links. No requests for information. Just an invitation. Jason exhaled sharply. His brain told him to ignore it, move on. But something deeper, curiosity, tugged at him. His fingers moved before he could stop himself. Who is this? He hit send. Less than a minute later, his phone vibrated. A reply. We'll explain soon. Meet us tomorrow at 2 p.m. Madison Hotel, 14th floor. Jason's pulse pounded in his ears. No names. No details. Just a place. A time. 1,000 warnings flashed in his mind. He didn't know these people. He had no idea what they wanted. But buried beneath the uncertainty was something else, an itch he couldn't ignore. Because if he walked away from this, he'd always wonder, what could have been? The real question was, did he have the guts to show up? Jason barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, his mind circled back to the email, the invitation, the risk. By morning, he had convinced himself not to go, at least a dozen times, and yet, by noon, he was already pulling on a clean shirt, heading out the door. The Madison Hotel stood tall in the heart of the city, looming over the streets like something straight out of a movie. Jason had never set foot in a place like this before, the kind of place where people had drivers, assistants, schedules packed with meetings that actually mattered. As he stepped inside, the air smelled expensive, polished wood, fresh flowers, something faintly citrus. His stomach churned, but he forced himself to move toward the elevators, pretending like he belonged. He pressed 14, watched the doors slide shut. The ride up felt endless. When the doors finally opened, he stepped into a quiet hallway. Plush carpet, soft lighting. At the very end, room 1403. Door slightly ajar. Jason hesitated. Was he really about to do this? Before he could second-guess himself, a voice called from inside. Come in. His breath caught, but his feet moved forward. The room was sleek, modern. A massive window stretched across the far wall, giving a perfect view of the city skyline. At the center of it all sat a man, dark suit, legs crossed, completely at ease, mid-40s, sharp features, eyes that measured everything in an instant. "Jason," the man said. Not a question. A statement. Jason swallowed. "Yeah." The man gestured to the seat across from him. "Sit." Jason did. His hands rested in his lap, fingers twitching slightly. The man studied him for a moment before speaking. "You helped someone the other night." Without hesitation. That caught my attention. Jason felt his throat tighten. Who are you?" The man smiled, just slightly. "Someone with resources. Someone who believes the right kind of people should be given the right kind of opportunities." Vague. Too vague. Jason shifted in his seat. "So, what is this? A job offer?" The man nodded. "In a way. But it's more than a job. It's an opportunity." He leaned forward. "Tell me, Jason, what do you want?" Jason blinked. "What do I what? In life? Right now? If you could change one thing, what would it be?" Jason exhaled sharply. His mind screamed. "Stability. Security. A way to pay my bills. To finish school. To not feel like I'm drowning every single month." But he didn't say any of that. Instead he asked, "I want to know. Why am I here?" The man's smile returned, slow, knowing. "You're here because I see potential in you. Because I think you understand something most people don't. How to recognize a moment that matters." He leaned back, studying Jason like a puzzle waiting to be solved. "And if you're willing to take a leap, I can offer you something better than just another paycheck." Jason's heart pounded, but he still had no clue what he was actually being offered. His palms felt damp against his jeans. Every instinct in his body screamed that whatever was coming next, it was going to be important. The man in the suit, still nameless, still unreadable, leaned back in his chair, watching Jason the way a chess player studies the board. "I'm offering you a way out," he said. "A way forward." Jason frowned. "Out of what?" The man's smile deepened, like he'd been waiting for that exact question. "Out of the cycle you're in." His voice was smooth, deliberate. "You work hard, but you're stuck. The wrong job. The wrong people controlling your future. One person makes a decision, just like that. You're unemployed. That's not power, Jason. That's survival." Jason's jaw clenched, because as much as he hated to admit it, the man wasn't wrong. "I'm listening," he said carefully. The man nodded, satisfied. "Good." He adjusted his cuff, as if this was just another routine conversation. "I run a private organization. We work with people who have potential, people who have the instincts to see opportunities others miss. We place them in positions where they can grow, learn, and eventually have influence." Jason tilted his head slightly. "What kind of positions?" The man chuckled, shaking his head. "Nothing illegal, if that's what you're asking." He gestured toward the massive window, the city stretching out behind it. "The world runs on relationships, Jason. Power isn't just money. It's access. It's knowing the right people, being in the right places at the right time. And you." He met Jason's eyes. "You've already proven you have that instinct." Jason swallowed. "Because I picked up someone's phone?" The man held his gaze. "Because you understood that small moments matter. Most people don't." Jason leaned back, his mind spinning. "So, what exactly are you offering me?" The man didn't hesitate. "A start." His voice was steady, unwavering. "A paid position. Travel. Mentorship. Connections. a way into a world most people never get to see. It sounded like something straight out of a movie, the kind of thing that happened to other people, not him. Jason hesitated. But why me? The man's expression remained unreadable. Because you didn't hesitate, and because people like you don't come around often. Jason stared at him, trying to read between the lines. Was this real? Was this a mistake? Was he about to agree to something he'd regret? His life wasn't exactly going as planned. He could try to find another job, go back to scraping by, fighting for every dollar, or he could take a risk. Jason took a slow breath, his heart hammering. He met the man's gaze. I'm in. The man's smile widened, just slightly. Smart choice. Jason had no idea what he had just agreed to, but something told him he would never be the same again.